Hello, Happy New Year, and welcome to another of our Creative Confidence series. I am thrilled to be here today with Eric Ries. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm sure the majority of you know who Eric is, or you probably wouldn't have joined us today. But just to give you a little background, so Eric is an engineer and an entrepreneur, but he has become very well known around the globe for a lot of his writing on the lean startup. So really codifying the process that a lot of startups and entrepreneurs and creative organizations go through to bring new and innovative offers to the marketplace. But he's here today because he has a new book that we just thought was absolutely terrific here at
Thank you.
IDEO and IDEO U called The Startup Way. And we're going to talk more about what that is about today. So, with that, we're going to start off with a question for you. We know we love to put people in other people's shoes. And today, all of you out there are going to put yourselves in Eric's shoes. And I'm going to have you imagine a moment that happened in his life. So, imagine you're Eric, you've written the lean startup. It's like a movement out there, and people are following it. People are talking about pivoting and
They sure are.
MVPs, minimum viable products, and build, measure, learn loops, and all of these kinds of things. And then all of a sudden, one day, you get a phone call from the CEO of a major global corporation with like 200,000 people in it. And I want you guys to think through and share in the community chat, what are some of the things that would be going through your minds and making you sweat as you think about taking something that's come from a startup and bringing it into a major corporation? So go ahead and share some of the things that would be on your minds, some of the challenges, some of the exciting things. And while we do that, we're going to have Eric kick us off by telling us what actually happened to him.
Sure, I mean, that really did happen. Um, I tell a story in the new book about when GE called and said, "Hey, you come talk to us about lean startup." And I get that call a lot from corporations, and they're usually not very serious about it because usually what happens is some executive or CEO, they read a book about innovation, they get excited about it like for 20 minutes, and then they like, get pulled back into their regular job. So when we actually talk to them about, hey, this is going to require a cultural change, this is going to require organizational change, they're like, never mind, forget it. So I take a lot of these calls. I usually say that's, I'm happy to help, let me know what you need. And that's usually the end of it. Especially because I have a tendency to tell people that if they want to know why they're having trouble with innovation, they have to look in the mirror. Now they're looking at the problem. A lot of corporate executives are like, "Thanks for coming in." That's the end of it, right? They don't want to hear about their own
Thanks.
personal behavior.
We'll
Right?
see you soon.
See you soon, right? And I don't, whatever. I'm not a professional consultant. I don't care. It's no problem. But anyway, GE called and they said, "No, we're really serious about this. We'd like you to come to the officers meeting," they called it, in Crotonville, like their legendary executive development center.
Mhm.
I didn't know GE especially well, except like, what you see on 30 Rock and, just from the general culture. And so, I remember looking up, I think they were, at the time, they were the fourth largest company in the world. It's like, okay, it's not like a Fortune 500 company. This is Fortune 5. And you're like, oh
Yeah.
my God, this is a very large company. And I didn't know what the officers meeting was at that time, but now I know. It is their annual like leadership retreat where they spend 3 days with the top 250 people in the company. So this is all the CEO's direct reports. Plotting strategy for the coming year. And I especially didn't understand that this is not an open meeting. They don't usually have outside people. This is an internal meeting. So Beth Comstock, who was the CMO at the time, who I actually met at an IDEO event originally, was really going out on a limb to have me come in and spend 5 minutes pitching lean startup to this very skeptical crowd.
5
can
minutes.
Imagine 5 minutes. That was scheduled for 5 minutes. We obviously took a lot longer, but I think they were very much prepared to pull the hook if it wasn't going well. So I pitched lean startup. It took me 300 pages to explain lean startup. They're like, no problem, just condense it down to 5 minutes. And so I go on and give my little pitch. Any questions? And this is a very corporate hierarchical place. There are no questions until the chairman has a question. Right? So everyone's looking at Jeff Immelt, CEO, and he's like, he calls on one of his VPs by name, so and so. Hey, your division only makes $500 million a year for GE. So how come you're not already doing this? And then there were a lot of questions. And then all of a sudden we were like, oh, he's serious? Like, uh-oh, better take it seriously. And it was fascinating because I'm like watching like all these like concerns and questions people have. You can imagine the skepticism in this room. People were like, why should I listen to you, like software dude? We make engines. A running joke for my years at GE was, well, no one wants a minimum viable engine, right? These things explode if you don't do it right. And like, what do you know? Software, what does that have to do with it? Silicon Valley, we're a 12-person startup. Like, what does that have to do with it? So like, it was tremendous skepticism. But to their credit, they said, well, this is all about experiments, right? So let's run an experiment. And they asked me to come do a pilot project with them, to like just a workshop with one of their teams to see how it would apply. And I remember Jeff was like, chairman's prerogative. I get to pick the project. So he's like, we're not doing an app. There's not going to be any software in this thing. We're going to build a diesel reciprocating platform called the Series X engine. I said, no problem. Happy to do that. I only have one question. What is a diesel reciprocating platform? I have no idea what we're talking about. So like, it was quite the educational experience for me to like learn about their business and the physics of it and the business model of it, and to build this program. Eventually became called FastWorks that wound up doing a lot of transformations at that company.
Yeah. I'm gonna pause and just look at what some of the things are that are coming in from people. But I can see people are wondering about what are the challenges replicating small experiments and creating a culture to accept experiments, implementation and budget. Change challenges. What happens when you change some of them?
Terrible.
Does this actually work in other domains besides startups? So lots of things, apples versus oranges. What is risk aversion? All of those kinds of things. So I'm curious. I think the majority of people probably with us today know about lean startup methodology. And I'm curious, when you started to think about how the lean startup evolved to become the startup way, and become something that was not just entrepreneurial, but intrapreneurial and inside of large corporations.
Yeah, for sure.
What are some of the things that stayed the same in your thinking, and what are some of the things that shifted?
Well, let me illustrate that through the story of this project, just to pick up the story when I just feel like, well, let's actually talk about it. I feel like so many people are like, my favorite is this guy is like, big mistake. You shouldn't have started that way. It's like, now you tell me. That would have been really helpful if we'd done this webinar 5 years ago. That would be terrific. And we did this with Toyota too. For the person asking about Toyota, it was quite a full circle moment. Anyway, so let me just kind of set the scene for you, so you can kind of visualize what this was like, because this is a very culture clash moment, and it was not exactly set up for success. The guy's like, "You made a mistake." It's not wrong. This was not a great way to start. So here's how we started. Picture a like HBS style business school classroom, tiered seating, the whole thing. I'm at the front at the podium. To my right, in the first row, are 3 people from the Series X team who have been summoned from Texas to Crotonville to have this workshop with me. It's not their choice. They've been told to come here and have this workshop with me. In the back of the room, there are 25 corporate vice presidents there just to observe. I mean, can you imagine? Like, these poor guys from Texas. This is the ultimate lose-lose situation for them, because on the one hand, this dumb software guy from California is supposed to teach them something new. If they admit that they learned something from the dumb software guy, what does that say about the quality of their pre-existing plan? On the other hand, if they say that this was a waste of time, what does that say about the chairman who told them to have, right? So they're just absolutely stuck. And the worst part for everybody is I don't know anything. Right? I don't know. I use the word engine and turbine interchangeably. I didn't know they were 2 different things, which drives them crazy. That's like not only 2 different kinds of products, but 2 different, fundamentally different technologies with nothing in common. So it was a real culture clash. And what was interesting about it was, I started out, and I came into the meeting really with the question that you asked on your mind: what's going to be the same? What's different? I didn't know. So I said, look, let's just apply. I could just pretend that I'm, in South of Market meeting with a startup who wants to build a diesel engine, and let's treat it the same. Like, let's see what happens. So I asked the team to present for the whole room, myself and all these luminaries, what is the currently approved business plan for the Series X engine. So this is a product that is used, I subsequently learned, for fracking, for stationary drilling, for distributed power, for marine electric, talking about the engines that power boats. It's used in locomotive. So like, it was like Dr. Seuss to me, like by sea, by land, on a plane, in a train, right? Like wherever you need power, the Series X engine is there. I was like, okay, whatever you say.
So it's for everything.
For everything. It's going to take $300 million and 5 years to build this product. After which we'll have a global launch, and it will be used simultaneously by thousands of people for all these things. It's going to make the company a ton of money. And they presented a slide that I will never forget as long as I live. Bar chart. It's a bar graph by year revenue forecast for Series X engine for the next 25 years. And it's a beautiful chart.
Because we know.
Obviously, we got right? So the first 5 bars of this chart, blank. Because of course, during the 5 years we're in stealth R&D, there's no customers, right? Then we launch the product, and there's this beautiful hockey stick shape, up to this. We call this the fantasy plan, right? Like, and I remember sitting there looking at the slide and being like, I don't know anything about diesel engines, but I know this graph very well. Like, did I mention I'm from Silicon Valley? Like, step into my office, my friends. Like,
I've seen the same
we
graph.
make this graph all the time, and of course, we don't live up to it, but we promise the moon. So, and I asked the people in the room, okay, who believes this forecast? Raise your hand. And I'm not making this up. Every person in the room raised their hand. They're like, of course, kid, you don't understand. The brightest minds of the G Corporation have approved this. This is the basis of our $300 million investment, and we have to make the $1 billion ROI. I'm like, oh, my apologies, no offense intended, but no, really. I pointed to a bar at random. Who here honestly believes that in the year 2023, we're gonna have exactly, 1.8762 whatever $billion in revenue?
Mm-hmm.
When you put it that way, everyone's hands like, well, exactly, well, and we start to have a conversation about, okay, so what do we know, what do we don't know? And what are the leap of faith assumptions that underlie this plan? What has to be true about the world for this product to be a good idea? And of course, this is an engineering company, so all they want to talk about is technical stuff. It has to have this efficiency rating, the materials, the blades work like this, the service, whatever, has to work when there's a lot of sand, and so you have to make sure it doesn't corrode, like all technical gobbledygook. I'm like, okay, but what about the commercial assumptions? Who's the customer? Yeah. What's going to be used for? How do you know those are the right 5 use cases? How does it get distributed? How does it get serviced?
And you're going to wait 5 years.
Right. And the business plan in Appendix B, footnote 3 says like, oh, solve all that problem. Like after 5 years of development, like solve all that problem later. And so it's like, okay, let's imagine that there's a significant problem with this plan. One of the leap of faith assumptions is wrong. Like the distribution network plan is not going to work. When do you want to find that out? Now or 5 years from now? Right? After you spent $300,000 or $300 million. And so we start having a conversation about, oh gosh, what could you do to build a minimum viable product to test these different assumptions? And at first, everyone was very skeptical, right? Minimum viable engine and whatever. And I was like, well, just bear with this as a thought exercise. What if we only did one of the 5 use cases first? Are some of them easier than others, right? Like stationary drilling is a lot easier than putting it on a boat. Because I hope for obvious reasons.
Water, right? Level of difficulty.
Right? Like the weight is super important on a boat, not important at all when you're on a stationary. So okay, would that save some time? And of course, like the way that these corporate projects, their fantasy plans usually work is we make the engineering problem harder for the designers and the engineers in order to produce a better fantasy plan. But that's not really a good approach because we've just compounded uncertainty on top of uncertainty by adding all these technical challenges. So the way we reduce cycle time is not by cutting corners and violating safety or whatever. It's by reducing the scope of the experiment to make it easier. So that would get it down to 3 years instead of 5 years, 2 years. We're working on like, hey, how long would it take to produce one engine? And they're like, kid, again, I don't think you really understand how mass production works. Once you set up the assembly line and the supply chain and all that stuff, that takes the same amount of time, no matter whether you produce one engine or 10,000. Like it's mass production. I'm like, okay, time out. Again, no offense. I don't mean one line of engines. How long to produce one prototype? And they're like, oh, we have to produce a prototype for safety testing, blah, 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 like in 1 year. And then one of the engineers is like, well, if you just wanted to do stationary drilling and you were willing to make the following 3 compromises, we kind of have an existing engine that's pretty similar to Series X. We could just modify it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how long would that take? And that would only take 6 months. So can you imagine we're going to get into market with a product 6 months from now instead of 5 years from now? Full 10x improvement in cycle time. And I'm like, hey, any VPs? All these VPs here, let's use them. Any VPs who have a customer that might want to buy that? One of the VPs, oh sure. I'm like, we're cooking with grease now, right? We're gonna make a sale, MVP in the market 6 months. And finally, one of the VPs who was just like, he's not having a good time at this workshop. It's finally like, I'm sorry, time out. What the bleep is the point of selling only one engine? Because he's like, a second ago, we were going to make $4 billion. And now what are we going to make, like $1,000 on this engine? And of course, I got engineers in the room. They're very helpful. They're like, oh no, sir, we're going to lose money on the first unit. Like because we got to sell it at a loss.
So how did you recover from that?
Right. And he's just, I'm like, thanks, engineer. That very helpful interjection. Right now when I really needed that. But I'm like, yeah, look, I think there's no way to recover from that criticism. I was like, if you already know what's going to happen in the future, then you're right. There's no point in running an experiment. Just do the plan. And he's like, okay, great. Problem solved. I'm out of here. Like, he's like, then I won't have to be in this stupid workshop. And that would have been the end of my time at GE, except his colleagues who had been listening this whole time said, hold on, wait a second. Didn't we just say a minute ago that we don't know what's going to happen in the future? And aren't there these commercial leap of faith? Yeah. And wouldn't we? So they themselves started to negotiate and think about what needs to be learned and what are the important things. And that was the start. That eventually became the first project in this FastWorks program.
Wow.
We did hundreds and hundreds of those projects.
And so it was really breaking apart something from that like fantasy plan, figuring out what they didn't know, getting them to share what they didn't know.
The honest about it was very countercultural for a company like GE to admit there are things you don't know, you're supposed to pretend. And so, and you have to admit that you might fail. The experiment might not be a success. And like, you have to think like a scientist, right? Experiments, hypotheses, like if the experiment doesn't work the way that's not a failure.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
necessary part of the learning process. So it was a very interesting moment of trying to get them to think in a new way.
Yeah. So I think I love the story. I think it's amazing. And it's a really great illustration of how you came into thinking about things in this way. If you could capture in a nutshell,
Yeah.
what your thinking is about moving to a more entrepreneurial management system.
Yeah.
How does that happen in the startup way, and what are some of the elements of it, of your thinking?
Yeah, this is really the thing that I became obsessed with over the past 5 years as more and more people would adopt Lean Startup. And there were really two very funny, very different use cases for Lean Startup that I would get dragged into that seem on the surface like they have nothing in common. So like I'm with Jeff Immelt and this series, like I'm doing these like mad, like we trained, I now routinely meet companies that have fewer employees than the number of managers we trained at GE just in FastWorks. And people are like, oh, our company's too big. I'm like, too big? Like, whatever. Oh, you only have 10,000
We've worked
employees.
with 250,000
Right,
people.
right. It's like,
nothing's too big.
nothing's like, oh, come on, they did this in the federal government. So there's like,
yeah,
right. I'm like, people like my organization's too bureaucratic and political. I'm like, compared to Obamacare, like, I'm going to say no, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to say no on that. So, right. So like, there's this massive set of companies and organizations that have been adopting these practices. And I've been trying to help them do these transformations. And at the same time, many of the companies who were early adopters of Lean Startup, who I met them when there's 5 people in a garage, they hit product market fit. Now they have 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000 employees. And all of a sudden they have these management problems. The CEO is like, wait, why is my company bureaucratic? Why are we slowed down? We're not as innovative as we used to be. What's going on? I thought we were the startup. We're supposed to be a perpetual startup. What's happening?
Yeah. How do you keep that same
right, that
vibe
spark,
and that same way of being alive?
And what I realized was I'm actually having the same conversation across these different domains because we're building these new companies to the same blueprint we've been using for 100 years. The organizational structures, incentives, and systems of these companies are relatively unchanged over these decades. And I'm like, wait a second. Can anyone think of any ways the world has changed in the last 100 years that might necessitate some new thinking? Like, surely we could do better. So I became obsessed with the question. First, it was really, how do we transform these companies, these big companies, to prevent them from dying? Then it was, how do we prevent these new companies from being built to this old-fashioned blueprint? And then I eventually realized, like, the issue is not so much, like, it seems like an intractable problem. We have this bad culture, we have this bad, like, all this stuff. But I was like, wait a minute. How come every startup is built to the same org chart? It's because founders have a mental model of what a company is supposed to be that is old-fashioned. So if we can change our mental concepts, our vocabulary, our the diagrams, the concepts of what does it mean to be a modern company, we can stop making this mistake over and over again. So that has been this kind of odyssey of trying to discover what would the blueprint of a modern company look like. And the book is my attempt to answer that question.
Wonderful. And you do a very nice job.
Oh,
so we'll get into some of the facts in there. I think we one of the things we did this time, we've got tons of questions coming in, and we also took a bunch of questions from people inside of IDEO and inside of the IDEOU community. So I'm going to start off with a couple of those.
Yeah.
And I know people are asking about how you can leverage both design thinking and Lean Startup or Startup Way at the same time. So what are the overlaps?
Yeah.
And what are the distinctions? So we get this from Sal, one of our business designers in Chicago, and hearing the same thing from people from Malaysia. What are the
very common question. There's actually a little mini book that just got published. It's called Lean Startup versus Design Thinking versus Agile. It's just like a whole essay just on this one topic because it's a common. I'll tell you a secret, okay, just between me and my 3,000 closest friends. Okay. The very truth of this is, if I ever am giving a talk to a vertical slice of the company where everyone in the room has the same job title, it's all designers, all engineers, all marketers, or whatever. Generally speaking, somebody will eventually come up to me and say, "Listen, Eric, isn't Lean Startup just Agile but rebranded for business people?" Or like if it's a business person, they'll be like, "Isn't this just lean manufacturing but rebranded, for designers? Like, isn't this just design thinking but rebranded for engineers?" And I'm always like, no matter what it is, I'm always like, you're totally right, it is. But do me a favor, don't tell the other functions that, right? Like, if the engineers knew that I was like tricking them into doing design thinking, they might not like it as much. So let's keep it between us. Because the truth is, I went way out of my way when I built Lean Startup to build it on a foundation of every good idea I could find.
Yeah.
So design thinking, agile, lean manufacturing, DevOps, customer development, even maneuver warfare, the OODA loops and John Boyd, for those that know that, like, and the scientific method, of course. So like I tried to synthesize the parts of those systems that made sense to me. But it was very important to me to not create another functionally siloed method.
Yeah.
Because what
Yep.
happens is, like, if you're a CEO of a company these days, like once a month, your head of each function will walk into your office and say, boss, you know what would be really great? If you could make the other functions do my thing and put me in charge, it would be the bomb, right? So if you could just get the engineers to do design thinking, that would be sweet. But like, head of engineering was here yesterday being like, could you just teach the designers to do agile and whatever? And like, we have, because of the way we built these companies, we have forced people into a very adversarial relationship
Yes.
between functions. And like, I mean, I know all these manufacturing people are like, I don't want to do a software thing. That's not my, everyone wants their own thing. And to be fair, every functional method has a unit of progress that is functionally specific.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I mean, the easiest one to see is Agile with like burn down charts and lines of working code and story velocity and stuff like that. If you've ever tried to get non-software people to care about velocity charts and burn down charts, you'll know like it's a very challenging thing to do. Design thinking has its own like similar concepts where it's hard to translate across domains. So my insight was we need to create a cross-cultural, cross-company learning method with its own vocabulary that is not rooted in any one function, and units of progress that can be translated to things that everybody in the organization cares about, which is always resources and impact, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it has to be translatable even for the business people, even for the CEO. It can't be about our like proprietary thing. And so that's the starting point for understanding what the relationship is between lean startup and these different approaches. I tried as much as I can to import that those concepts, but to either rename them or
Mm-hmm.
tweak them so that they would have wide adoption. And I think, I can tell you a lot of stories about companies where I won't name the company, but I was just in a company where they had a totally segregated agile software division separate from their hardware division.
Yeah.
So these two groups don't ever talk to each other, and they have a lot of mutual mistrust. And I was sitting, ironically, the hardware people had been really embracing lean startup and were really liking it, and the software people were like, we don't need that, we already have agile.
Yeah.
And they asked me, would I come in and meet with like 100 agile coaches in their software division? I said, sure. So I come in, I have this meeting, I give them the pitch, lean startup, we're having the exact same conversation, but for engineers. And at some point, someone's like, yeah, but even if we do lean startup, we can never get the hardware people to do this. They'll never do lean startup. I was like, well, let me tell you some stories about hardware people who are already doing lean startup. And they looked at me like I had conducted black magic. They're like, you got them to care about iteration? And I'm like, yeah, because I wasn't trying to lord it over them. I invited them to connect to things. So like, that's to
Well, and you're
me
problem solving for more contemporary ways of working
that's
and the
right.
problems that we all face with the way the markets are
Yeah.
structured and the
So
way
so so I
yeah.
think so specifically for design, I do think the
Mm-hmm.
Achilles heel of design thinking, not in the way that it is like design, that like not it's not intrinsic to the theory, it is a consequence of how we structure it in a lot of organizations. Um, like, imagine I have a God's eye view of the corporation, and each of the siloed functions is literally like in a big grain silo. Like, imagine
Mm-hmm.
like a big giant God-sized, Pringles
Mm-hmm.
can, right? Like, and so if I zoom in and like pop the top off one function, I'll be like, oh, look at the agile guys like running around doing this highly iterative,
Yeah.
highly experimental, customer-centric method. Oh, look, the designers doing this incredible design thinking. Hey, look, in manufacturing, customer development, everyone's doing their iterative thing. And I say, well, is this an iterative company, a learning-oriented company? In a lot of cases, the answer is no. Because how does work get passed from silo to silo?
Yeah.
I have been in too many organizations where they use design thinking to produce a specification document, which is then handed to the engineers
Yeah.
for implementation. And 5 minutes after the handoff, the engineer's like looking in the spec document. It says, well, it says here this thing should be infinitely fast and infinitely cheap, but you can only have one of the two. So which is it? And the
Yeah.
designers are like, my work
Sorry.
here is done. Like, just do it. Just build the spec, right? And so like,
Mm-hmm.
we can't keep working on it. We did all the learning for you.
So one of the things that you've really tried to do is structure something that works across the
Exactly
entire
right.
organization and brings this mindset and a way of thinking and being that's invited
Yeah.
into the corporation.
And when you have
now.
engineers and designers
Yeah.
in particular, because this is one of the most contentious relationships in most companies, when you have them working side by side as peers, you wind up with better learning on both sides. So
Mm-hmm.
like, I mean, you wind up where you actually bring engineers into the design process early. They can give their input about what's feasible And also they can be learning about not just what the spec is, but why.
Yeah.
Like, why did we make that choice?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the customer? What's the use case? And
Yeah.
that, even if you wind up handing off the implementation later, you still get this learning that's transferable. But even better, in the startup way, we could say, you know what, we don't ever have to do hands-offs.
Uh-huh.
We could just build cross-functional teams from scratch and have them work like a startup.
So I'm going to move on to another question we have here is about, what are some from Ryan? What are some of the mistakes that large organizations typically do in the very beginning when they're trying to integrate this entrepreneurial way? So it sounds like there are definitely challenges with working across
Very much so. Yeah.
functions, across silos. There are
Totally.
problems with the CEO.
Of course.
Taking a look in the mirror.
Yeah.
Just list for me some of the
Sure.
patterns that you've seen in the variety of companies.
Well, and Jeff's like, hey, that's not design thinking. I'm like, I'm with you, Jeff. The point is that when we bring these good methods into a warped organizational structure, we wind up warping the method. So yeah, of course, we shouldn't do what I just described with the binder, and that's like, yeah. But the whole point is we have to figure out how to prevent the CEO and the business executives from structuring the company such that we create this adversarial relationship.
Yeah.
So working cross-functionally is a very difficult thing for most companies to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that like the three like super hard but really obvious things that people do wrong are they don't have proper team structure.
Mm-hmm.
They don't assign
Not a
people.
cross-functional
They don't
team.
right. They don't create cross-functional teams. They don't have people work on their startup full time. Right. So they have people working on 20 things at once. If you look at the psychology literature about productivity, every study that's ever been done, as far as I'm concerned, in the history of the world that has looked at multitasking has found that it is not effective. You just should. It's never as good as doing one thing at a time. There's no evidence to support it at all, and yet I constantly meet teams where everyone's working on something 10% of their time, 20% of their time, and there's like a corporate disease where we just can't admit that we're not doing as many things as we say we're doing. So we like pretend that we're doing 20 projects, but we're really only doing 5. And so like 15 of them are just like hanging out. It's a mess.
Making everybody feel bad.
Yeah. So and like, can you imagine? So imagine I was like, hey, I got an idea for a startup. It's gonna be this awesome new revolution in technology. I'm gonna get it funded on Scientific. It's gonna be great. Here's my plan. I'm gonna pick 20 people and I'm gonna assign them to show up at my office on Monday. I'm gonna have them work 20% of their time on this new startup, and we're gonna get funding from a VC where instead of raising like a round of funding, what I'm gonna do is say like, hey, every quarter, give me some more money until I tell you to stop.
Yeah.
Like, not one startup in the history of the world that you've ever heard of could have been done this way.
Or would have gotten funding.
We would just, it's totally crazy. So yeah, there's like 3 classic mistakes. Cross-functional, like we build functional silos, we don't put people on projects full time, and then we don't fund projects correctly. We use, in the book, I call it entitlement funding rather than metered funding.
Okay. Great. I'm going to move on to another one. I can see just tons of questions, so I want to start pulling
Oh my God,
in. So one more from the IDEO community, and then we'll go in. But at the core of Lean Startup and Startup Way, the build measure loop has evolved into creative learning organizations.
Yeah.
But a lot of people were asking us questions as we prep for this about how do you know it's the right thing to learn?
Totally.
And how do you know that you have good learning? So I'm wondering what some of the things are there.
Yeah, learning, I don't know if it was the right word to use because it's very loaded for a lot of people. When you say we're going to learn something, people get nervous about it. It's going to be some academic exercise or like, it's a very common excuse if you didn't perform, right? Like when you're scraping the bottom of the barrel of excuses for why you didn't deliver, you're like, but it was a great learning experience. It's like that in a lot of corporate settings, especially, that's like kind of a bad word to use because learning implies failure by definition, always. But I chose it intentionally, and I think it's important to reclaim learning and give it a more rigorous definition. In Lean Startup, I call it validated or scientific learning. Because like, imagine I was like in my scientific lab, and I was like, guess what? I've been playing with my chemistry set, and I just invented the elixir of immortality. And you're like, wow, do you have any proof? And I was like, no, I learned how to make the elixir, but I can't tell you about what I learned. I can't prove it to you. You'd be like, that's not learning. That's BS. Right? That's not learning. That's like, why you can't just claim that you did something. What's the proof? Now, if I'm like, well, listen, I had one cohort of, lab mice that are like fruit flies, and you didn't give them the elixir, and they lived, X days. But then I gave them like my elixir V1, and they lived for 10 days, and the elixir V2 lived for 15 days. Right? Like there's a very obvious and clear way in a scientific context you demonstrate that you have achieved some kind of cause and effect.
There's proven data evidence.
And like we've been working on the scientific method for like what, 200 or 300 years, depending on how you count. It's like well-established forms for how it works. And the fact that it had to be invented means that it's not intuitive. So it's hard. The scientific method is not easy. I occasionally get people complaining that if entrepreneurship, like that they criticize lean startup as trying to turn entrepreneurship into a science. But if entrepreneurship was a science, then everybody could do it. Therefore, if that's no good. And I'm like, dude, science is a science and very few people are good at it. Like, it's freaking hard. So yeah, this is not easy, but it is clear. We understand what it is. So we have to apply that same rigor to what we claim to have learned. So a very common situation with a minimum viable product.
Yes.
Think about that, the Series X engine even. The plan, the leap of faith assumption says customers with these attributes are going to want to buy this product. So before we even build it, it's not like you walk into Amazon.com or Walmart and say, hey, give me a diesel reciprocating platform. Like, this product is bought through a sales process.
Yeah.
What's the first artifact people encounter in the sales process? It's not the engine itself. They encounter a brochure, a promise about. So you take the promise to someone and say, hey, would you like to buy this? And they say, get the hell out of my office. No, of course I don't want to buy that. That's terrible. Now, have you learned something yet? I would say not quite yet. You've got the possibility that you're not on the right track. Well, let's take it to a second customer. Second customer is the same thing. Third customer is the same thing. Like, okay, well, maybe we've learned this isn't quite right, but that's not the kind of learning we're talking about. Learning that you're wrong is not what we want. We want to learn the solution to the problem. So then you pivot. Say, okay, the first brochure promised this level of performance, this price point, these features. Let's try something different. Take that to 10 customers, and 1 out of 10 says, oh, I'm interested. Then you do it again. Now 3 out of 10 customers. Right? So now you're starting to say, hey, each iteration of the product, we seem to be getting a better response from customers. That's proof that something is changing from version to version, from cohort to cohort. So that it's very important that we not only ask people, what did you learn, but we also ask them, how do you know? What is the evidence that supports that? And we have to train people in these more rigorous ways of thinking, no matter what function they're in.
What I really love, one of the things that I love in the way you talk about learning loops and measurement is that you're forcing the pace in a lot of these. You're saying, don't let a week or 2 weeks or a month go by without going out and having an opportunity to gather more data, gather more evidence.
That's right.
Because I think that's one of the things that people can always lean back, cool their heels. Oh, we're not quite ready.
We're never ready. No one's ever ready. Yeah.
And so how do you force the pace to share things and start looking at that data over time?
In the book, I say that accountability is the foundation of management. Like, ultimately what matters is leadership holding people accountable for pace and speed. If you don't do that, then you always get delay. Delay is the most rational thing in the world because, especially if you operate under entitlement funding, if you delay, you're still going to be funded.
Yeah.
So
where's the pressure?
Like, where's the pressure? In fact, it's actually counterproductive to ship. Like, I know a lot of teams that sit there on a Friday and they're like, okay, we're ready to ship on Monday, or should we delay 2 weeks? Let's do a little
it's always easier to delay.
Right. Like, you should always delay, because if you, so that's 4 possible outcomes: ship or don't ship, times it's a success or it's not a success. So if you ship and it's a success, what will happen to your budget? It will continue. If you ship and it fails, your budget could be canceled.
Yeah.
If you delay, there's 2 possibilities. You either had a good reason or didn't have a good reason. Just kidding. You always have a good reason. There's an infinite number of good reasons to delay. So you always come up with a reason.
Yeah.
And then what will happen to your budget if you delay for a good reason? In most organizations, nothing.
Yeah.
So logically speaking, you should always delay to improve your chances of your one big swing being successful. If you build your company that way, not only do you wind up wasting a lot of money and time, all this delay, but people eventually realize, wait a minute, if I'm audacious enough, I can play this game over and over again and get promoted out of this job before we ever ship anything. And then whatever happens is the next guy's fault. Yeah. So you wind up with all these middle managers running around these organizations that have never shipped anything in their life, but have gotten amazing reviews. And that's really toxic to building a creative and design-oriented culture.
Yeah. So I want to start pulling in some of the questions we can see. So I can see a chunk of questions are forming around how do you get this started inside of a larger organization? So from Kim, what are the conditions for readiness? On innovation occurring that'll lead to impact? From Andreas, what are the first organizational habits that need to be broken? So when you're getting things started in an organization, what are how do you pick like the project, where to start and where to get?
It's hard. I mean, so you can't be picky at first. Like, to me, the entrepreneur's mantra is 3 things. Like, think big, start small, scale fast. That's it. So think big. So you have to have in mind an organizational transformation that you think could work. But just like we did at GE, start small, 1 project, 4 projects, 5, like a small number of pilot programs, and do those projects right.
Yep.
Don't do it halfway, because if you do it halfway and it doesn't succeed, half the people will say it's because we did this at all, and half the people will say because we didn't do it all the way. So do the first projects all the way, and then always have a built-in scalability plan. So my general rule is double every time when in doubt. So when we did this at G, we had one project, we had 4 projects, and then we started to do 4 projects at a time, every couple of months. And then we would do 8 projects at a time. And so it's just like scale it up, but have a plan to scale it with pace.
Yeah.
In terms of choosing the projects, at the beginning, beggars can't be choosers. So we would take anything. We're just like, send us, you're tired, you're hungry, you're poor. Like, we'll take whatever. And the truth is, that's actually a great strategy because you want low expectations. I loved getting the orphan project that's like stuck between 2 divisions and can never get funded. And like everyone's like, this project is a bunch of losers. And then you whip it into shape real fast, discover the people are perfectly talented. It's the organization that's the problem. And then you seem like you did magic.
Hmm.
So I like the I like the unassuming, decrepit projects from the dregs of the organization, no problem. As you build the transformation, you can start to get more rigorous about portfolio building, about project selection. Like, I mentioned, that at some point for the GE projects, we made the project team bring their executive sponsor to the workshop, and they would learn about
Right
FastWorks
from the get
from the
go.
very. That was a prerequisite for being. We couldn't have imposed that rule at the beginning because no one would have showed up. So we added rules as we went. In the initial cohort of project, there was no dedicated founder, CEO, leader of the team in a lot of cases. You can't get anything done without a dedicated leader, but we didn't make that a requirement until we built up some political capital. So it's
So in
really
the beginning, you're pulling some of the whatever you can find,
exactly just
ensuring
start
that those
wherever it
early
can.
ones start well and finish.
Yeah, we always made sure the teams had proper coaching, had executive air cover. Like, we really set it up so that they could succeed, and we put them under a lot of pressure. We did like the initial FastWorks projects had 4 months to demonstrate success, and they had to pitch their plan to very senior executives at the beginning, and they had to demonstrate their progress to senior executives at the end. So it was a high stakes, high pressure thing. And that allowed us to then say, look, because you're being held to a high standard, ask for what you really need.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and that's when we uncovered all these organizational mistakes. It was hard to get teams allocated, structured properly. There were all this political nonsense that we uncovered. We had to get people to learn to speak openly about these things, which were a little bit countercultural and like a little bit embarrassing to admit.
Well, and so somebody's also asking about Roman is asking it in the beginning when you talked about the Series X project, and there was the fantasy plan that you worked backwards from and deconstructed. Is that an approach that you often use? Is that a natural way where people do what you usually do, come in with the typical plan you would,
and then
let's
just
walk
break it down? I
backwards
actually really like to work that way. I feel like I'm the last person in startup land who's pro business plan. I'm just saying, like, not the fiction writing part of it. So we can scrap the Word document and the diagram and the beautiful pictures. Like, just give me the Excel spreadsheet. Like, show me how individual customer behaviors add up to a highly scalable business. And from there, you can easily identify the leap of faith assumptions. Because imagine I have a spreadsheet from pick your favorite business plan you've ever written.
Yeah.
Like, and of course it was in Appendix B in 2-point font. Okay, so I gotta have my magnifying glass with me. So I got my magnifying glass out. I pull out your spreadsheet, print it out, zoom in. I'm gonna find some box somewhere that's gonna say 10%. I'm like, oh, what is this 10%? It says percentage of customers who sign up, who become paying customers after the free trial. Oh, that's an interesting number. Is that something that should be in 2-point font in Appendix B? Or should that be in like 100-point font, blinking red, leap of faith assumption on my wall? Well, I know it's the latter. Why? What happens to your beautiful spreadsheet if I change that 10 to a 0?
Yeah.
It's like a nuclear bomb. Can you see the zeros cascading out? The whole spreadsheet turns to 0 because if nobody will sign up, it really doesn't matter what the average lifetime value doesn't matter. The growth of nothing matters because nobody wants to buy our product. So we have a fundamental problem.
So how do you peruse a business plan to identify which ones are the leap of faith assumptions?
Yeah, there's a whole technical aspect to this called innovation accounting, which we're obviously not going to get into too much detail here unless people genuinely want to talk.
It's one of my favorite parts.
Okay. Well, I don't hear that very often, but yes.
It's a really good
thank
one.
you so much.
So we'll talk a little bit more about
that. Happy to talk about it. But basically, just like you didn't learn cost accounting from some guy on a webinar in 5 minutes, like, if you want to study this, you got to learn the math. It's complicated. But the idea is to deconstruct a business plan in a rigorous way to identify which of these metrics have high sensitivity to the final outcomes. And the way you do it is by looking at the inputs that drive the model, not the outputs. So, like, even that Series X ludicrous hockey stick that I was teasing them about a second ago, there's nothing wrong with a hockey stick. What is wrong is pretending that hockey stick is a prediction about the future. It's not. It's a deductive consequence of a series of assumptions. Well, the assumptions are where the value is, not the outputs. So in the chapter on innovation accounting, I try to show how the fantasy plan actually describes the end zone of where we're trying to get to. And innovation accounting gives us a rigorous way to evaluate progress against that goal, even when the gross numbers are very small.
And then what are the questions and metrics you need to look at in order to progress
Mhm.
backward from the
That's
reality
right.
of now
And like in
towards something closer to what
most
fantasyland might really
teams,
look like?
if they run an experiment and nobody wants to buy it, are like giving up. They're like, oh, this is bad. I better not tell anybody. But I would say finding out that we have bad news that's true is a lot better than having good news that we made up.
Yeah.
So you ran an experiment, nobody wanted it. That's a great place to start. Now we know that we're at zero. So we're at the 0 yard line. We
Yeah.
know we need to get to the 100 yard line. So let's
Yeah.
march down the field. Let's
Yeah.
build, measure, learn our way to subsequent experiments and see that we're making progress. I think we can destigmatize that
Yeah.
so that it's not such a big deal.
Okay, I'm going to go to a speed round because
Okay,
there are
speed round.
so
Oh
many
my, these
questions.
questions are amazing.
So, Cynthia, silos and hierarchies. How do you get around them?
Just blow them up. I mean, obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but
you just got to move beyond them.
yeah, like I in the book I lay out the actual blueprint of how I think these silos and functions should work together, and so like there is some rigor to this, but like there's nothing sacred about these silos. They're not magical. They were not given to us by Moses on stone tablets. Like we can change them.
Another one from Andreas. Many corporate environments now have innovation departments. Is this good? How should the organization be educated?
Yeah, so it's interesting you use the term innovation department because that's not necessarily bad, but usually what I see is what I would call an innovation lab. So generally what happens is I go into a company and I ask the CEO who's in charge of innovation in this organization. And they usually will tell me everybody is. I'm like, okay, but if this was a different function I was asking you about, like marketing, would you accept that answer? Do we need a chief marketing officer? No, everyone's in charge of marketing. What the hell are we talking about? We don't need a chief financial officer. We'll just make everyone in charge of finance, and we'll put up posters on the wall and say, everybody think finance, good finance thoughts. Like, I mean, we'd be in prison in no time. Of course we wouldn't do that. Now imagine I'm like, hey, you know what we should have? A finance lab. Let's have the finance people go work in the finance lab, and then like we'll outsource all the finance stuff to them, and the rest of us could just pretend it doesn't. Like, of course that would never work. So why is innovation any different? I call it the missing function in the corporate org chart. I think we should treat entrepreneurship as a first-class corporate discipline, just as important as marketing, engineering, design, or supply chain, and we should integrate it into the org chart in a very specific way, which I outline in the book.
Nice. Last thing.
Okay.
Where do you find entrepreneurs inside of a corporation?
Oh, this is a great question. It's so counterintuitive to people. Nobody believes me when I tell them this, but organizations of any size, just by the law of large numbers and the normal distribution of talents, are loaded, absolutely loaded with entrepreneurs. You wouldn't believe it. And I'll just tell you one last story. One of my favorites. I was working on a project that came to one of my workshops that was a joint project between finance and IT to do what's called corporate consolidation. This is like one of the most boring projects you will ever hear about. Most creative people, when I start telling them about what corporate consolidation is, they're just like, kill me now, right? Like, what? And it's like the worst functions, right? Like IT and finance, like the most snarling, evil, like uncreative, whatever. And the project team, when it came to me, was a 25-person committee, everybody on it 10% of their time. So this is like a nightmare project. Here was their plan. Okay, here's the plan. They were going to spend this committee 18 months studying the problem and figuring out a new global standard for a new software finance product that would do the consolidation differently. They would then print that out into a binder, like we talked about before, hand it off to the CIOs of all the divisions, and tell them to spend 18 months implementing this new standard. So 36 months from now, we're going to have these amazing productivity improvements. Come on. We all know what's going to happen. These projects are like classic, black hole zombie projects that don't deliver any value. And who's going to be accountable for the screw up? Nobody, because the CIOs are going to say, well, it was a bad spec, and the people who designed it are going to be long gone. So, right. So how are you going to know? So this is a nightmare project. So we spent 3 days together, after which the team reorganized into a 5-person cross-functional team. And they went around to different P&Ls and they said, listen, we'd like to make you an offer, voluntary offer. I'll tell you what to do. If you say yes, our whole team will be on an airplane the next day to your corporate headquarters, wherever it is in the world. And we will sit with you. First version of the software will be stood up in 30 days. And every quarter, we will voluntarily give you the chance to switch to the new software if you want to. And we will not leave until we have proven that we can improve productivity for your P&L. And after which we'll do it for a second and then a fourth and an eighth, right? Like then we'll scale up and refactor it, right? And refactor the differences. And the people that they made that offer to called me up and were just like, what did you do? Was there something in the water? Like we did the workshop in San Francisco. So they're like, Did you
what
do something funky in
happened?
San Francisco? You know, like, right? Was there some kind of pharmacological or spiritual miracle? I'm like,
Yeah.
there's no miracle. These are the same boring people that worked here before, but finally given the opportunity to act in an entrepreneurial way. And this is the part nobody believes. But I was there. I saw this with my own eyes.
Yeah.
The intensity, the creativity, and the passion of these 5 IT finance dudes were every bit as entrepreneurial as anyone you would meet in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Like, they were the real deal, even though if you looked at their resume and the way they were dressed, you know, you would never in a million years have been like, oh, there's an
Yep.
entrepreneur. So there are an insane number of these people in organizations that just hidden in plain sight. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that most organizations teach them that they have to hide the entrepreneurial side of themselves and leave it at home. Don't bring it to work,
Yep.
because we want you to be a corporate drone and not think creatively. And companies swear that they don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at the deep systems of the company, how they reward people, how they promote people, how they allocate resources, they do. So you
Those are
say
the
with
things
your
that are
mouth,
forcing people back
you
into the
tell
dark
people to be
corners.
innovative. They hear
Yep.
with their ears,
Yep.
you want me to be innovative, but they hear with their wallet, you don't want me to be innovative.
Yeah.
And guess who wins?
Yeah. Well, I think that is an excellent note to leave it on, that we
Oh, thank
believe,
you.
I think that's one of the biggest things we have in common. We believe anybody, anywhere is capable of doing these more modern, entrepreneurial,
Amen.
creative ways
Amen.
of working. So thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing
Really
your
my
book with the
pleasure.
world.
Thank you all so much.
And we'll have more to talk about soon. Thanks, everybody.
Looking
Have a
forward
great
to it.
day.
Thank you.